There's a sentence almost everyone in your life has repeated to you like it's a law of nature. Renting is throwing money away. Buying is always smarter. Every dollar of rent is a dollar you'll never see again, while every mortgage payment is you paying yourself, building wealth, becoming an owner. It's repeated so often that it stopped sounding like an opinion and started sounding like math, and today we're going to actually check whether that math is true. Because here's the strange part. When you buy a home, a huge amount of your money also vanishes every single month and never comes back. It just hides better than rent does. Rent is honest. You can see it leave. Owning is full of costs that disappear just as completely, but they're scattered, buried, and renamed so they don't feel like money thrown away. They feel like being responsible. A lot of them are exactly the same thing. So today we're going to follow the money on both sides, one line at a time. What renting actually costs you, what owning actually costs you, and why the honest comparison is almost never the one people make. Because the real question was never rent versus buy. It's which set of unrecoverable costs is smaller for your situation, and what you do with the money the cheaper option frees up. That's the whole game. Here's the idea to hold on to, because everything comes back to it. Every way of putting a roof over your head has money you never get back. Renters see theirs clearly. It's called rent. Owners have theirs too, but it's split into 5 or 6 pieces with different names, so it feels like it's going somewhere. Most of it isn't. The trick to this whole decision is learning to see the owner's hidden rent as clearly as the renter sees theirs. Let's start with renting, because it's the simple one. When you pay rent, 100% of it is gone. You get shelter for the month, and you build zero ownership. That part of the myth is completely true. Rent is pure unrecoverable cost. So if renting were being compared to a mortgage payment that was all yours, renting would obviously lose. But a mortgage payment is not all yours. Not even close, especially at the start. Because a mortgage payment splits into 2 very different things. Part of it pays down your loan balance, and that part genuinely becomes your money, stored in the house as equity. But the other part is interest, paid to the bank, and that part is gone exactly like rent. It buys you nothing but the privilege of borrowing, and here's what almost nobody realizes about how that split works over time. In the early years of a mortgage, the vast majority of your payment is interest, not principal. On a typical 30-year loan, in the first few years, something like 70 to 80% of every payment can go straight to the bank as interest. You feel like a homeowner building wealth. But for years, most of your payment to yourself is actually rent paid to a bank instead of a landlord. You're renting the money, and interest is only the first hidden cost. Next comes property tax, and it never ever stops. Even after the mortgage is fully paid off, decades later, you will pay property tax every year for as long as you own that home, often 1 to 2% of its value annually. On a mid-priced home, that's thousands of dollars a year, forever, that you never get back. It's rent you pay to the government to keep the house you supposedly own. Then there's insurance. Homeowner's insurance is mandatory if you have a mortgage, and wise even if you don't. And it's another payment, every year, that buys you nothing but protection and disappears completely. A renter pays a tiny fraction of this. An owner pays the full weight of it on the whole structure forever. It's one more line of money leaving your account each month that builds you exactly no equity at all. Then comes the quiet killer, maintenance. When you own, there is no landlord to call. The roof, the furnace, the water heater, the plumbing, the appliances, the paint, the pipes, all of it is yours to fix and yours to fund. A common rule of thumb is that maintenance costs around 1% of the home's value every year, on average. On a mid-priced home, that's thousands more dollars a year, gone, just to keep the place standing. And then there are the costs of the transaction itself, which are brutal, and which people forget entirely. Buying a home comes with closing costs, often several % of the price. And selling it is worse. The agent commissions and fees can eat around 6% of the entire sale price. Buy and sell one home, and you can hand over close to 10% of its value just in friction, money that vanishes into the process of moving. And there's one more cost, the biggest one that nobody counts, your down payment. To buy, you hand over a huge lump sum, often tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes far more. That money is now locked in a house. And every dollar locked in the house is a dollar not invested somewhere else, not compounding, not growing. Economists call this the opportunity cost, and over decades it can quietly be the largest cost of owning it all. So let's add up the owner's hidden rent, the part that vanishes just like a renter's check, the mortgage interest, the property tax, the insurance, the maintenance, and the lost return on your down payment. Put those together, and financial researchers have a clean estimate for the total. The true unrecoverable cost of owning a home runs at roughly 5% of the home's value every single year. This is the number that changes everything, and it even has a name, the 5% rule. It says the real cost of owning, the money you'll never see again, is about 5% of the property's value annually. Roughly 1% property tax, 1% maintenance, and about 3% as the cost of the money tied up in the home, not the mortgage payment, the part of owning that vanishes, exactly like rent. So here's the honest comparison, the one nobody makes. Take the home you'd want to buy and find 5% of its price. That's what owning it really costs you per year in money you never get back. Now compare that to a year of rent for a similar place. If the rent is lower than that 5%, then renting is not throwing money away. Renting is the cheaper option, and buying would be the money pit. And in a lot of expensive cities, that's exactly the situation. Where home prices are enormous, but rents are relatively moderate, 5% of the purchase price can be far more than the cost of renting the identical home. In those markets, the person renting and investing the difference isn't the fool in the story. They're the one quietly making the smarter financial move, while everyone tells them they're wasting money. Now, defenders of buying will say, but you build equity, and that's real, so let's be fair to it. Every month, a slice of your payment does become yours, and over a long time that adds up to a substantial asset. But remember the amortization trap. In the early years, that slice is small because most of your payment is interest. Equity builds slowly at first and only accelerates later. If you move in 5 years, you built far less than you think. And then there's appreciation, the dream that the house itself makes you rich. Sometimes it does. But over the long run, home values in most places have historically risen at a much more modest pace than people assume, often just a bit above inflation, nothing like the stock market. The house you think is a growth investment is frequently a place that roughly keeps pace with the cost of living, while charging you 5% a year to hold it. So if buying's hidden costs are this heavy, why does it so often still win? Because of one deeply underrated force: forced savings. A mortgage makes you build equity whether you like it or not. Every payment quietly stores some money in the walls. And most people honestly would not have the discipline to save that money otherwise. For a lot of people, a house is the only serious wealth they ever build, precisely because it forced them to. And that points straight at the renter's one job, the entire thing their case depends on. Invest the difference. The financial argument for renting only works if the money you save by not owning, the gap between your rent and that 5%, actually gets invested every month and left to compound. On paper, the renter who invests the difference often comes out ahead. The catch is enormous, and it's not about math at all. Because in real life, most renters do not invest the difference. They rent the cheaper place, and then they spend the savings. The money that was supposed to go into the market goes into life, and 30 years later they have no house and no portfolio, while their friend who bought has a paid-off home. The homeowner didn't win because the math was better. They won because the mortgage forced a discipline the renter never imposed on themselves. So the real comparison isn't rent versus buy, it's your rent versus 5% of the home's price, plus your own honesty about what you'd actually do with the difference. If renting is cheaper and you truly invest the gap, renting can win. If renting is cheaper but you'd spend the gap, buying's forced savings might save you from yourself. The right answer depends as much on your behavior as on the numbers. And there's one more factor that quietly decides it: how long you'll stay. Remember those transaction costs, the 10% lost buying and selling. If you buy and move 3 years later, those costs alone can wipe out any gain, and you'd have been far better off renting. Buying generally only starts to win after you've stayed long enough to outrun the fees, often something like 5 years or more. Below that, owning is usually the expensive mistake. So let's be fair, because buying genuinely wins in a huge number of cases. If you're going to stay put for many years, if home prices in your area are reasonable compared to rents, and if rents around you keep climbing while your mortgage stays fixed, buying can be a fantastic financial and emotional decision. You lock in your housing cost, build real equity over time, and eventually own the roof outright. That's a powerful, stabilizing thing. And renting genuinely wins in a huge number of cases too. If you might move in a few years, if you live somewhere the purchase price is wildly out of line with rents, or if you'll actually invest the difference with discipline, renting can leave you richer and far more flexible. No maintenance, no property tax, no 6% exit fee, and a portfolio that's liquid instead of locked in your walls. Neither choice is the responsible one. It depends. Because this was never really only a math question. It's also a life question. Buying buys you stability, control, a place that's truly yours, and protection from a landlord raising the rent or selling out from under you. Renting buys you flexibility, freedom from maintenance, and the ability to move for a job or a life change without a 6% penalty. Those are real, human values on both sides, and the math is only half the decision. So the trap was never renting, and it was never buying. The trap is buying a home you can't really afford, just to stop throwing money away, and discovering that the interest, taxes, insurance, and maintenance are throwing away more than your rent ever did, while you're too house poor to invest a cent. That's the version that quietly hurts people. Not renting, buying badly, for the wrong reason, on a myth. Picture that buyer. They stretch to the edge for a house, mostly to escape the guilt of renting. Now the mortgage, the taxes, the insurance, and a surprise $10,000 roof have them living paycheck to paycheck with nothing left to invest and no flexibility to move. On paper, they're a homeowner. In reality, they're more financially trapped than the renter they pitied, and paying more in hidden rent than that renter pays out loud. So what do you actually do? First, run the 5% rule for your own situation. Take the price of the home you'd buy, multiply by 5%, and divide by 12. That's the true monthly cost of owning it, the vanishing part. Compare that honestly to the monthly rent on a similar place. That one calculation tells you more than every renting is throwing money away lecture you've ever received. Second, understand the two levers that decide everything: how long you'll stay, and the price to rent ratio in your area. Stay a long time in a place where buying is cheap relative to rent, and owning usually wins. Move often, or live where prices dwarf rents, and renting usually wins. Those two factors, honestly assessed, will point you to the right answer far more reliably than any slogan or any relative's advice. Third, if you rent, actually invest the difference on purpose automatically. This is the entire ballgame for the renting case, and it's where almost everyone fails. Set up an automatic transfer of the gap between your rent and what owning would cost into investments the same day you get paid before you can spend it. Do that, and you've built your own forced savings, the one real advantage a mortgage had over you. And here's the part that's bigger than housing, because it's the same blind spot everywhere in money. We judge costs by how visible they are, not by how large they are. Rent is painfully visible, so we call it waste. The owner's interest, taxes, insurance, and maintenance are scattered and renamed, so we call it investing. But money doesn't care what you call it. Gone is gone, whether it's one obvious check or 5 hidden ones. The visible cost is almost never the real cost. Renting isn't expensive because you can see the rent leave. Owning isn't cheap because its costs are hidden across a dozen line items with respectable names. The entire skill of this decision, and honestly of personal finance in general, is learning to add up the invisible costs as ruthlessly as the obvious ones, and then choosing based on the total, not the theater. So let's reframe that famous sentence one last time, because now it should sound different. Renting is throwing money away is only half a fact. Renting throws away one visible payment. Owning throws away 5 hidden ones, and whether that total is more or less than your rent depends entirely on prices, on time, and on you. Sometimes owning wins by a mile, sometimes renting does, but it is never automatic, and it was never a law. So the next time someone tells you you're wasting money by renting, don't feel ashamed, and don't rush to buy to make the feeling go away. Just ask one honest question. In my city, for the home I'd actually buy, is 5% of the price more or less than my rent? And will I really invest the difference? Answer that truthfully, and you'll know your move. Ignore it, and you're just obeying a slogan. Because a roof is a roof either way, and both paths can lead to a comfortable life. What changes is whether your money is quietly building something, or quietly leaking away while you congratulate yourself for being responsible. Rent can be the smart, rich choice. Buying can be the trap. Or the exact reverse. The house doesn't know or care, only the math does, and the math is different for every person who runs it honestly. So measure it honestly in the two things that actually matter, not the slogan, but the true annual cost of owning, that 5%, against your actual rent and your honest answer about how long you'll stay and whether you'll invest the difference. Put those real numbers side by side. For some people, they scream buy. For others, they scream rent. Both are right answers to different questions asked by different lives. Let's go back to that famous line one more time, because now it looks completely different. On the surface, rent is throwing money away is timeless wisdom, the reason a whole generation feels like failures for renting. In the math, it's half a truth that ignores the 5% a house quietly costs you every year, whether you notice it or not. The slogan was never analysis, it was just something people repeat. Renting your whole life is not automatically a mistake, and buying is not automatically wealth. Each is a tool, right for some situations and wrong for others, and the honest answer depends on your city, your timeline, and your discipline, not on a phrase your uncle repeats at dinner. Rent can quietly make you richer. A house can quietly make you poorer. The only way to know which is yours is to actually run the numbers. So, renting your whole life. In the myth, a lifetime of throwing money away while smarter people built wealth. In the math, often just a different, sometimes smaller, sometimes larger pile of unrecoverable costs next to a pile of freedom and a portfolio that can quietly outgrow a house. The price of renting was always visible, the price of owning was always hidden, and the person who wins is simply the one who added up both and chose with open eyes.